Jeff Wayne's musical version of The War of the Worlds produced not just an epic soundtrack, but also easily one of, if not the most iconic depiction of the fighting machines that's ever been designed, showcased in the concept album's legendary front cover. This phenomenal picture perfectly portrays perhaps the most visually impressive action scene in the story, with the Royal Navy's HMS Thunderchild being melted by the heat ray of what is generally referred to as the Jeff Wayne tripod, understandably. However, it's interesting to point out that despite this common colloquialism, Jeff Wayne wasn't actually the one who designed this fighting machine. During the course of creating his album, Wayne hired British graphic designer John Pash to work as the art director of the project. This was after Wayne had been displeased with work for the album he had commissioned from Roger Dean, best known for his work for the progressive rock band Yes. Wayne felt that Dean's ideas simply didn't fit with what he had in mind, as Jeff Wayne later explained in an interview with Den of Geek in 2009. We knew that we wanted to work with painters and artists that had an understanding of science fiction and the Victorian age, and the art director my father and I chose to work with was a guy called John Pash, whom the Den of Geek article keeps spelling as John Pesh, who had an amazing understanding of what we wanted for the album and booklet. And to give you an idea on just how diverse his talents were and still are, he's the guy who created the famous Rolling Stones tongue. Yet, despite being the person that directed the overall design of the record sleeve, Pash, in this more, I guess, managerial role, also wasn't the designer of the fighting machines. But of course his contribution to not just the whole album, but also the cover itself was immensely significant, with Wayne saying, "Pash designed the logo which says Jeff Wayne's musical version of The War of the Worlds, and he also introduced us to the traditional Victorian writing we used. He also put us together with other artists and animators, but they all had to be skilled enough to work with paint. They came in and we went through the whole structure of what I wanted, and then everyone went away, read the book, and all came back with ideas." So Pash had assigned multiple artists to work on the album, and those who produced paintings for the included 16-page colour booklet were Jeff Taylor, Mike Trim, and Peter Goodfellow. And as Jeff Wayne continues, it was Michael Trim who designed the Martian fighting machines, which started life as pencil sketches that I still actually have to this day, and eventually they ended up as finished paintings. So really, I guess they should be called the Mike Trim tripods, or Trimpods if you will. Prior to designing what presumably no one would have believed would end up being possibly the most famous tripod depiction in history, it was actually perhaps somewhat predictable that Mike Trim was on the path to create such a celebrated and renowned tripod, having previously worked on several Gerry Anderson productions, hinting at his talent for mechanical and vehicular design. Born at the end of World War II, Trim started his decades-long career in 1964 when his father saw an advert in the newspaper seeking model makers for a film company. Beginning in the final days of Stingray, Trim would work as a model maker and designer for many of Gerry and Sylvia Anderson's series, including Thunderbirds, Captain Scarlet, Joe 90, The Secret Service, and UFO. Most of which I remember from my childhood, which was many decades later, showing their enduring nature. Starting out in the model shop, Mike eventually became the assistant to special effects director Derek Meddings in designing the fabulous futuristic vehicles, buildings and look of Stingray, but did other types of work for seasons 1 and 2 of Thunderbirds as well, including model maker, scenic artist, designer and storyboard artist. By the time Captain Scarlet came about, Trim began taking on more and more responsibility for the vehicle designs, with many of those used by the organisation Scarlet works for in the show, Spectrum, being designed by him, including the saloon car, the maximum security vehicle, passenger jet and the helicopter. And man, looking up these vehicles now is really bringing back some memories for me. I remember having toys of these. His designs struck such a chord with the film crews that they were ascended from one-off parts to staples of the Spectrum fleet. Derek Meddings was so impressed by Trim's work work that when Joe 90 came about, he gave him free rein over the model design work, as Meddings became more involved in feature films. Trim consequently took on the bulk of this for the shows, with Thunderbird's vehicles he designed, including the recovery vehicles, the demolition and object moving operator, and Skythrust. Mike's work also didn't stop at just the Andersons TV series, however. He also worked on their feature films Thunderbirds Are Go, Thunderbird 6, and Journey to the Far Side of the Sun. After contributing a single unused vehicle design and model for the 1975 series Space 1999, he then moved into freelance illustration, which is when in 1976 he made his first sketches for Jeff Wayne's musical version of The War of the Worlds, bringing to life his famous fighting machine. And these sketches really reveal just how detailed Mike Trim was when it came to constructing his creations, carefully annotating his illustrations to clearly show exactly how it would look and work. One thing I noticed that's quite interesting is how his handwriting seems to drastically change between the sketches. My guess is that maybe people were having trouble reading his notes, so he started to make his writing clearer maybe. But actually it's quite funny because actually trying to read it, I found it surprisingly clear to make out, even in this slightly blurry scan, which reveals that already in these early sketches, he's even got the texture of the eye-like windows planned out, proclaiming that they should have a honeycomb structure, like the compound eye of an insect. Indeed, I feel like I say this for most designs. It's curious how many depictions take inspiration from bugs, but out of all of them, I'd say Trim's version is perhaps one of the most bug-like tripods ever created. It's basically like a big robot bug, highlighted by those bulbous fly-like eyes. However, it's interesting to note that this earlier version of the fighting machine shares the triangular-shaped eyes that only his design of the handling machine would retain in the final rendition. In general, the body here looks far more sleeker and futuristic to me. The references to flies continues with his specification that it should have a segmented body shell, but it's clear in my opinion that Mike Trim was also heavily inspired by mosquitoes as well, with those what I believe are annotated as antennas, but especially of course the dangerous heat ray extending out like a mosquito stylet. And I didn't even realise until reading now about mosquitoes that segmented bodies is an actual like biological classification or whatever, and mosquitoes have that too. It also seems appropriate that he presumably took inspiration from both these bugs, as it turns out mosquito is Spanish for little fly. Though I think this is also the biggest criticism of this design that I've seen people say, that it's basically just a big mechanical bug and is generally considered to be a pretty inaccurate design compared to what's described in H.G. Wells's story. Yet despite this, it's still massively highly regarded as one of, if not the best. And I suspect a reason for this is due to it being so strikingly featured on the iconic cover of what would become one of the best-selling albums of all time. Out of all the depictions and imagery that has been produced of the War of the Worlds, this painting is perhaps easily the single most iconic image to ever be created out of it. It so perfectly captures the confrontation between this large earthly ship being melted by the even more gigantic Martian ship. A perfect image to represent this alien threat and what the story is about, basically, this Martian domination over humanity, as fantastically depicted by the tripod's posture, is so superior to the Thunderchild, almost as though staring it down, but looking down its nose at the ship, as it effortlessly melts it with such precision and perfect aim. And its legs look so firm and sturdy, yet wide and open, taking up so much space in its position, ready to accept the challenge, as if it's saying, "Oh, here we go, you want some, mate? What, you think you're hard or something? Come on then, you bloody try it on with me, son." Showing mechanical design prowess, Michael Trim specified in his early sketches precisely how the tripod would move, writing, "Each leg would lift separately and then rotate at the shoulder, which are connected via ball joints stabilizing the strut. Swinging the leg forwards then lowering, the body would remain on an even keel." An interesting detail that I never noticed before is that each leg is made up of 3 tubular sections with circular intersections, which from an engineering perspective, unless I'm mistaken, would strengthen it. Just the fact that he put that logic into it is pretty incredible. I also like the way that not only is the machine a tripod, but even each leg is made up of 3 tubes. This trilogical pattern continues, with each leg being held up by a platform that is Y-shaped like a microphone stand. It is joined to the leg by a ball joint, thus allowing the foot to assume any angle the ground may take. Specifying these details really makes the design feel like it's a real piece of engineering, which is what sells it, I think. You could imagine this actually existing and working. The colours used in the image are also so cleverly done to make the tripod stand out, with the background being shaded primarily with 3 tones, blue, white, and what I've just realised is the black of the black smoke, which I suspect is being emanated from what I think is a canister at the bottom, as Michael Trim specifies in a sketch that this is open at the rear. I've never realised that that must be the black smoke before, but it makes so much sense considering the scene it's depicting, and kind of adds to the hopelessness of the Thunderchild's heroic act, I guess, steaming into a fighting machine that's not only utilising the power of its heat ray, yet has enshrouded the background with its dark poison. Not only that, this also highlights with such retrospectively obvious clarity the perceived fight between good and evil here. The half of the sky that the Martian is proudly presented in front of being black, and it being black directly because of the Martian, represents its insidiously malicious intentions, while this diagonal split in the sky perfectly puts the Thunderchild against the half of it that's a heavenly white, representing the light of this hero and its sacrifice. And yet again, just like the tripod, the ship itself, at least partially, is contributing to that colour, with the smoke or steam emanating from it and rising up. Specifically, it looks like due to it being melted. So specifically, its sacrifice is what's causing the sky to be white, seemingly. Well, that's my interpretation anyway. Of course, it's clear that in the War of the Worlds, the Martians serve as a reflection of human nature. Their attempt to conquer us using superior technology is a mirror of humanity's nations doing the same to technologically inferior people. The prime example being the British Empire using its advanced, powerful Royal Navy to establish the biggest empire in human history. And consequently, I wonder, though I might be stretching here, that if the black smoke represents this malicious domination, well, the Royal Navy's ship is likewise expelling black smoke from its own funnels. Yet, despite this being a significant cloud, it is utterly dwarfed by that of the tripods, showing how insignificant humanity's biggest empire and biggest weapon, the most powerful ship of the most powerful navy, is in comparison to the invaders from Mars. Jesus, this is like what I used to write in media studies. This isn't to take away from the heroic act of the Thunderchild, of course, and this is displayed further by extending the front cover to include the back as well. The full image shows the steamer that the Thunderchild is sacrificing itself to save, sailing away into the now gleaming beautiful yellow-orange sky to safety. Notice the contrast between this relatively normal looking picture and the battle going on, in particular just focusing on that background behind the tripod that looks like the depths of hell. There's further smaller details that add to the horror and personal heroism of the ship, by the fact that if you look closely, you can even see the people that are on board the Thunderchild. Some other little bits of trivia I learnt from Michael Trim's sketches include that these parts of the tripod, commonly depicted as being red, though actually in the cover image look pretty see-through, I'd say. I think the slight reddish highlight is a reflection from the heat ray. But anyway, these are noted as being, unless I'm misreading, the fighting machine's ears. which is curious. Indeed, the shading of the tripod in this image is something I find very impressive, as it truly looks metallic. And you might be thinking, well, obviously, but the reason I point it out is because here's a fun fact: much like many famous pieces of art, there's actually multiple versions of this picture. Well, at least two. I think this one is an earlier version that downplays the symbolism, but arguably is even more beautiful with that lovely yellow sky being present nearly throughout. It's also interesting that seemingly originally the Martian eyes were going to be dark green in this picture, as opposed to the light green in the final version. The precise shades of green and the colours of the image as a whole seem to change somewhat in other images, though I'm not sure if these actually are more alternative versions, as they are very close to the cover one, or if these might just be particular prints or scans of the same image that's just made it look this way perhaps. It's not just the colour change, there are some differences, just look at the skyline for example, so I'm not entirely sure, but either way just look, especially on the leg joints, at how the metal on these two versions is different, and how impressively metallic it looks on the sleeve cover. Not ridiculously shiny, but there's enough metallic depth there that you can imagine it in the sunlight as a walking engine of glittering metal, as the book describes. It's just very nicely done, I thought, and shows how skilled Mike Trim is, not just in design, but also in painting. I also found this version on Google Images, which genuinely took me months to notice that there's cats in the windows. I don't think this was Michael Trim's doing though. Decades after this image was cemented as a science fiction icon, Trim returned to the world of Thunderbirds, working on the 2004 film directed by Jonathan Frakes as a concept artist for a number of weeks. Among other things, he came up with a design for the interior of Thunderbird 2, but ultimately none of what he produced was used on screen. Despite this, his impact and contributions to the world of design are undeniable, as showcased in the 2006 book of his illustrations entitled The Future Was Fab, F.A.B., The Art of Mike Trim. As Jeff Wayne himself so perfectly put it in 2009. Basically, it took about a year to get the full artwork finished and packaged, but I think that they all created an image that has lasted 30 years. In fact, we have a full-scale Martian machine around 30 feet high in the show that is based on the paintings, and it actually functions in a way that the audience actually becomes part of the show. It's really quite an amazing piece of engineering, but if it wasn't for Michael Trim and his paintings, we wouldn't have the Martian ship that we have today. Indeed, the fact that the War of the Worlds has had innumerable interpretations over the 125 plus years it's been in existence, yet this specific version is likely the most remembered and iconic depiction, is really an immensely phenomenal achievement that can't be overstated enough, and is a testament to the design of the Mike Trim tripods featured in Jeff Wayne's musical version of the War of the Worlds.